This is the Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, featuring Gvosdev, Tatiana, Serafin, and Colin Dueck. This episode was recorded on March 25th, 2021.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Doorstep podcast. I'm your co-host, Gvosdev, a senior fellow here at the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs.
And I'm Tatiana Serafin, also senior fellow at Carnegie Council, and very excited today to welcome Colin Dueck, professor in the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University and non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. We very much look forward to hearing what you're working on and also to have you here today to speak with us about Biden's first 100 days. What is the Biden-Harris administration doing right? How are they achieving their goals? Are they connecting what they really wanted to do is connect foreign policy to domestic policy? Is that working? And so kind of at this halfway point in the 100 days, a little bit over, we wanted to have you on and have your expertise and help us understand what's working, what's not working. And also fortuitous, he speaks in a few hours. So what do we expect him to say would be my kind of second half question. And I'm also looking forward to what Facebook and Twitter and Google chiefs are going to say to Congress today. We can maybe throw in a little bit of tech and disinformation talk at the end of today's session. But very excited to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today. And could you start us off on what's working, what's not? Where are you at this kind of 60-day point?
Great, thank you, Tatiana. Nice to be here. Nice to see Nick as well. So just to sort of big picture, 100 days, what's got right, what's wrong. I think that Team Biden, including on foreign policy, kind of got the message from the Trump years that you can't just go back to 2015, 2016. You can't go back to Obama's second term entirely. In other words, there's got to be some connection to voters' concerns, pocketbook concerns, middle class, working class concerns, whether it's trade policy, interventions overseas, the way you frame and talk about and think about foreign policy. So I think that message got through. So in a way, there's actually a bit of a Trumpish element to it, even though they've rejected, much of what Donald Trump did as president. So that's interesting. From my point of view, I think there are some things they're getting right that actually are continuous. I mean, there was a recognition on China that we can't go back to 5 or 10 years ago. That you cannot have just pure free trade with a country that doesn't practice free trade. There's got to be some recognition that the Chinese Communist government plays by its own rules, and so we're going to have to adjust in order to counteract those challenges. So that there's some continuity there. As you probably saw, there was a verbal exchange in Alaska just a few days ago. So in some ways, actually, the Biden team is harder on top Chinese officials than President Trump himself was. But we will have to see how that plays out. I mean, what exactly is Biden going to do in the coming months and years on China? What will they keep and what will they dismantle when it comes to some of the changes that were made under Trump? Where I have some concerns about where Biden may be going wrong, and again, you're going to get differences of opinion on this because part of it is your perspective politically. I worry that national debt is now mounting to the point that it's so excessive that it's going to cause problems long-term for our country with spillover effects on foreign policy, defense, and other areas. And I mean, we already saw last year massive increase in debt. It's a long-term trend, no matter who's president, apparently, but it's certainly increasing even more so now. So that's a concern, is debt. But there, it's going to depend partly on your own domestic policy preferences. I would say something else I do worry a little bit about with this team. There's such an inordinate emphasis on verbal reaffirmation of liberal norms. I mean, it's a liberal internationalist framework. The people staffing it are from that point of view. That's a perspective that puts tremendous emphasis on getting things right verbally from a liberal point of view. The problem sometimes is action to match the words, gaps between capabilities and commitments. thinking that the words in themselves are self-executing, which they're not. So we've got a lot of statements of concern, right? You go down the list. There's statements of concern about a long list of countries and issues, but what will the Biden team actually do about it? That's an issue, and I have a feeling that that's not going to go away. So there's a mixture of some good and some bad so far. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. But there's lots more to talk about for the next hour.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up with that question of continuity, which I think a lot of people on both sides of the aisle don't necessarily want to look at, right? The idea that for Democrats and particularly for progressives, the idea that the Biden-Harris administration would continue anything that was started under the Trump-Pence team is anathema. For some conservatives, the idea that the Biden team doesn't represent that radical of a break in certain areas of foreign policy and domestic policy from what preceded it is something that I think the media environment wants to emphasize the discontinuities. But this question of continuity, a few days ago, a former Doorstep guest and friend of the Doorstep, Politico's Nahal Tusi, rhetorically asked, I mean, are there things from the Trump administration that the Biden team ought to be embracing? And as she put it, that, are there parts of the foreign policy and domestic policy agenda that we would want the Biden team, or that people should expect that the Biden team will continue things that were started under the Trump administration? Do you have any sense there of the? You've already talked a bit about China. I think that has been something where people have seen and have commented on this degree of continuity. Are there other things where, particularly for conservatives, where they can look at the Biden approach and say this isn't something that would have been too different from not only to say a Trump administration, but from if there had been a Rubio or a Cruz or a Jeb Bush administration in 2016, for that matter, points of continuity there?
Yeah, exactly. So just to take a step back, I mean, in a way, the single biggest point of continuity is that the U.S. has a global system of military bases and alliances. It has a forward posture in the world that is still there. I mean, so for all the concern about Trump, and I think initially there were some pretty good reasons for it, especially, he did in fact say NATO's obsolete, right? But NATO continues, it still exists, and in some ways it's been bolstered actually in locations like Poland. So there has been continuity, and the Biden team continues to double down on that and saying, we love NATO, right? Now, whether you think that's good or bad, again, there is a school of thought on both left and right today that's saying, we really need to re-examine some of these basic assumptions. We need to scale back on a lot of these military commitments overseas. But the fact is that there is tremendous continuity in terms of just that fundamental forward posture. Trump did not dismantle it for all the controversy around him. Biden certainly does not propose to dismantle it. So there's underlying continuity, and a lot of conservatives want that continuity. I mean, conservatives are themselves divided over this issue. That's become more clear in recent years. There is a wing of the Republican Party, libertarians, but also some others, some of the populists, somebody like a Tucker Carlson, I think, who really question fundamentally why we need these military alliances and commitments overseas in such a sweeping way. But actually, a lot of conservatives to this day, particularly in Congress and in DC and in think tanks, are very much in favor of it, right? So there's a spectrum of opinion on that. So it kind of depends on what sort of conservative you're talking about. And just one other area I'll point out, another shock from the Trump era was that so many blue-collar Republicans really are quite skeptical of free trade and globalization. We had thought up until 2016 that free trade was the standard Republican position. If anything, it was Democrats who were more skeptical. However, Trump turned that upside down with this withering critique of free trade and economic globalization. Republican politicians noticed that, to say the least. So now that's up for grabs as well. So there's an area of continuity too, which is to say, I don't see either party at the moment enthusiastic about any new big multilateral free trade agreements. There is an underlying sense of protectionism, a focus on domestic priorities, a focus on jobs, whether it's Trump or Biden. Buy America. Wasn't it actually Biden that campaigned on that? Buy America last year. So I don't really think either party embraces a free trade to the same extent that some presidential candidates did only a few years ago. Now, whether that's the conservative position is up for grabs. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the times we're living in. There have been generations in the past where Republican Party was very much closely associated with high protective tariffs from its formation, from Abraham Lincoln through, William McKinley through the 1920s. That was the Republican position. It then became a free trade party in the 50s with Eisenhower. And over the years, it's become the free trade party. But that may be up for grabs. What it means to be a conservative in America really is up for debate today, I think, on issues like free trade.
That's so interesting, the trade that you're talking about, because I just was reading again this morning about the ship stuck in the Suez Canal and, how that's going to impact oil prices, goods, right, coming through there because they can't move it. It's not, it's stuck, and it's day, I don't know which day it is. And I think this really brings home the fact that we are interconnected in a way that I don't know that Main Street typically thinks about. And I think the pandemic brought that to the fore, when people couldn't find toilet paper in the stores or basic goods, and you realize many of these goods came from China. And so I do think that the conversation on Main Street is the fact that we are interconnected. But is there a will, and are companies going to change that? I'm not so sure. So the parties might be wary of, this idea of, talking about more free trade agreements. But I think, I don't know, it's my hypothesis that it exists, and companies aren't about to change their supply chains. What do you think about that?
I think there's something to that. So I think in the end, the general public actually is more sensible than sometimes they get credit for, right? And I think you probably see it the same way. In other words, a common view, if you really dig down into these polls, the way people really talk about issues like globalization, is mixed feelings. Yeah. And when I say mixed, I mean mixed. In other words, most Americans in both parties will say, yes, on balance, we understand that trade brings certain benefits for the United States. We're not trying to embrace a full-blown return to the 1930s. I think people are sensible enough to see that. At the same time, they do worry that globalization overkill has at times cost American jobs. And China's a great example. And this is where Trump, I think, really did find a gap between elite opinion and popular opinion, at least on the Republican side. I can tell you from working on different campaigns, I mean, he hit that gap in a way that nobody else did. He had a point, actually, which was that jobs were lost in manufacturing in other areas because of competition from China. There's some truth to that. And so there's going to kind of waking up process politically, I think, that's now pretty widespread. And Chuck Schumer doesn't really disagree with Donald Trump on that one. So here we are. Now, when it comes to the supply chains you're discussing, there has been a partial dialing back. I mean, the Trump team waged a sort of economic campaign against China. It was controversial. It involved protective tariffs, right? It had, let's say, some success. People debate how much, but they certainly changed the conversation. I mean, it set the agenda, and you'll notice that the Biden team hasn't really undone those sanctions comprehensively. So there are legitimate concerns about economic interdependence with China. If, for example, you're dependent on a one-party dictatorship on public health issues that are going to ultimately hurt Americans. I mean, it seems to me as a valid concern. It's been highlighted, and it's become very vivid for people on both sides of the aisle. But are we going to completely stop trade and investment with China? No, clearly not. We're certainly not going to stop trade and investment completely with democratic partners in, Canada, Europe, Japan, South Korea. So there's been a sort of a correction, right? There's been a kind of a step back But globalization often moves in these waves where it's kind of one step back, two steps forward. I think that's what we're in right now, was an unexpected correction of a shocking kind in the form of Donald Trump. But we're not, I don't believe we're going to go back to a system, if it ever existed, where there is no economic interdependence between nations. I mean, that's not realistic. And matter of fact, economic interdependence is ancient. So, it's moving forward at the same time.
I liked, Colin, your point there about mixed feelings, because I think that really sort of sums up the doorstep view on so many issues, which is that, and you've seen this in years past in various think tank reports and speeches made by politicians and leaders, that Americans support engagement, Americans support alliances, but that support is usually defined as 100% full-throated. So that even this week in Brussels, Tony Blinken, speaking at NATO, cites the Chicago Council polling data, which says 80% plus of Americans support alliances, and says, see, this is why we're back in. And then, of course, the nuance is that they support alliances, but the mixed feelings about dependencies and who's pulling the weight and what obligations and the like. And so, I mean, I think this building on this point you said of the unexpected correction that Trump in some ways represented over the last number of years. Uh, do you think that this is a kind of a permanent correction? That is, that we will still be thinking about a Trump effect for years to come. That is, that even as America re-engages with the world, build back better, all of these slogans, there's always going to be an asterisk that says, yes, but keep in mind Donald Trump and mixed feelings about this. I mean, do you think that there is, that instead of, I guess asking really, do you see we're only 60 days into the Biden administration, but moving forward, is there a sense that the Trump years will represent a definitive point of change, or is this largely going to be a blip? I mean, and again, how does this play out not only with the Biden team, but also given the fact that approximately half the country did not vote for Joe Biden, and control of the Congress is really split. So that are there legacies from the Trump years that are going to continue to be influential as we move forward?
Sure. Well, look, I think there already are legacies in the sense that the Biden team has had to incorporate some of what Trump did quietly, in a way, and in some cases not quietly, in this direction of greater sensitivity to kind of middle American pocketbook concerns. But look, I think I would be skeptical of anybody who claims to know for a fact. I'm not a political scientist, so we sometimes have these people rattling around in the halls. But I would be skeptical of anybody who claims to know for a fact whether 10 years from now we've gone in a much more isolationist direction, or whether that has been utterly repudiated. I really don't think we can safely predict that. As a matter of fact, I think the sensible, accurate thing to say is that there are multiple paths forward that are possible. I mean, there are multiple possibilities here. There are different scenarios. You could imagine, depending on events, depending on leadership, depending on trajectories, that 2025, you get a kind of president who's a pretty muscular internationalist, or somebody who's very, very different. And then as you go further and further forward in time, even more so, right? The range of possibilities opens. So it's, Trump's already had a big effect that cannot be erased. Whether that starts to look more like an outlier, or whether it looks like really an indicator of a long-term trend, remains to be seen. But I do think that, at least on the Republican side, I think if you listen to politicians, actually, a lot of them have got the message that they sound more Trump-ish on, if you think about people who might run for president 3 years from now on the Republican side, it's not that they're It's not that most of them are isolationist at all, but there's a little more of an American nationalism, more populist element, the way they sound on trade, international organization, the way they sound on military intervention overseas. They've got the message, right? And by the way, the question of engagement, partly it's a question of how do you want to be engaged? There's a longstanding dispute between the liberals and conservatives over how to be engaged, right? So on an issue like Iran, the mainstream Democratic position is the way we engage is through negotiation, as Obama did, to reach a nuclear arms control agreement. And I think Biden would ideally like to reconstitute that agreement. Most Republicans in Congress and even outside, I think, are very skeptical of that agreement. It's not that they're against the US being engaged overseas. They just think it was a bad agreement. They are more hawkish on Iran, and they would like to see a harder line on Iran, which is actually exactly what Trump did. So there's different ways of being engaged between left and right, between Democrats and Republicans that are part of the story as well. I don't see Republicans suddenly becoming Democrats, put it that way, right? They're not going to suddenly convert to liberal policy preferences across the board. So these kinds of debates will continue.
I'm glad that you brought up Iran, because I do want to talk about different areas of the world that maybe you're seeing that, you mentioned there's talk, but will there be action? And, we do want to look at, as the United States becomes more of a multiracial society with many different immigrant groups, with many ties to many countries, what about policies in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Africa, areas where, maybe they're not in the press all the time, but we should be looking at? Is there anything that you feel that's missing in either the rhetoric that's coming out of the administration or actions, or both?
Okay, yeah, great question. And by the way, I think Latin America doesn't really get enough attention in presidential administrations of either party. I mean, this is a longstanding problem. So there, the top priorities tend to be migration issues, counter narcotics, transnational organized crime, and trade and investment. And again, Trump introduced this radical shift from previous Republican administrations by framing migration as a threat. Right. So if you think back to, say, George W. Bush, I mean, he actually had a really keen personal interest in U.S.-Mexican relations. I think if it hadn't been for 9/11, he probably would have made it more of a priority. But actually, Bush, as a previous governor of Texas, believed in strong U.S.-Mexico relations, really free trade with Mexico, that legacy going back to NAFTA. And then 9/11 sort of shifted the focus. One of the things that has been revealed again over the last few years is that the two parties see the issue of migration very differently. And I will just draw your attention to public opinion polls that suggest that whatever other areas of agreement there are, for example, terrorists are a threat, nuclear weapons are a threat. When it comes to illegal immigration, there is no agreement. Democrats do not see illegal immigration as a national security threat. In fact, that would be seen as almost an illegitimate way of talking about it. But when you look at these polls, Republicans, I tend to study more the Republican side. Republicans see illegal immigration as a national security threat. I mean, that is not how your average DC Republican foreign policy expert thinks, but it is how a lot of Republican voters think. Trump recognized that. I'm not getting into his sincerity or insincerity on it, but he recognized that. He spoke to it. It's one of the reasons he won the nomination. So what you're seeing with Biden, this is one area where there is discontinuity. You are seeing, I think, on this area, a dramatic shift from the Trump administration's immigration policies. Trump, as you know, instituted some remarkable shifts in US immigration policy, including this Remain in Mexico program. Biden has gone in a very different direction, a sharp difference. So the two parties are now polarized on this issue, left versus right. This was not, in previous generations, a polarizing issue between the two parties, right? But it has become one. There is a sharp difference between the base of the two parties as well as their leaders on this issue now. So here you have discontinuity, you have intense partisan disagreement, and you have really popular concern. I think there is genuine feeling at the base of both parties, strong feelings on this issue that are opposed. Is that going to affect your policy toward Mexico and Central America? Absolutely. You're going to get one kind of policy under a Donald Trump, or frankly, whatever Republican comes next, and then a different kind of policy under Joe Biden, right? So migration and immigration are transnational issues that overlap with US foreign policy and with our relations with Latin America.
Speaking of, I just saw comments on the increase at the border, and the reason that there's been kind of more people coming in is it was very simple. There's jobs here. The U.S. is hiring. That's in contrast to this, oh, we need to close the borders. So, maybe argument of, and it is polarizing, right? I think this is a big discussion point that maybe isn't getting enough attention. And I have to tell you, I ask because we're talking here at the Doorstep about grading the current administration on how they're doing on foreign policy initiatives and how they're engaging with domestic policy with their goals. And I asked my students yesterday in classes, what grade do you give Biden Harris? And their answer was C. Their answer was a C because of what's happening at the border, because migration isn't being handled perhaps any differently than under the Trump administration, because there are still children dislocated and displaced from their families, and they don't see any effort to change previous policy. So I'm wondering, if you look at it in that way, in that grading sort of way, what grade would you come up with on this issue, that of Biden Harris on the border?
I would give them a C at best, maybe closer to a D, although for different reasons. I have a slightly different take on this one. It seems to me that most Americans would like to have a functional immigration system. I actually came to the United States from Canada years ago, and I was struck how long it took me to become a citizen. I'm sure many people have had that same experience. But we don't really have a functional immigration system in this country. The asylum system in particular, it seems to me, is broken. It's broken. You've got millions of people over the years who've tried to enter and have entered the United States. And the fact is that there hasn't been an orderly way to process that or keep it legal, right? That is not something that I think most Americans think of as a positive thing. The American public in general, I think of as humanitarian and fundamentally open to the idea that historically it's a country of immigrants, but it's also a country of laws. And when you have an asylum system and an immigration system that is fundamentally dysfunctional, it's a problem. And I think a lot of more sensible progressives and Democrats understand this and have realized that if Biden goes too far in the direction of being seen to almost welcome a surge of migration, this is going to be a problem politically for the Democrats in the midterms. They know this. And so you'll see in sympathetic press like the Washington Post, this is said explicitly. There's a nervousness, and for good reason. So it's not that everything Trump did was terrific on this issue, not at all. But as so often with Trump, he asked questions that actually a lot of people are asking. What would it take to have a functional immigration system? Are we satisfied with the one that we have? I think on this issue, Biden is basically just rolling back, in a lot of ways, rolling back the Remain in Mexico program, sending mixed signals as to whether migrants should come or not. Yes, a lot of people come here for economic opportunity. That's probably the single biggest reason. Some are fleeing violence. You have innocent people who just want a better life for themselves and their family. And yet we have laws. So how can that be squared? I'm not sure that it can be squared by sending out mixed signals and saying, well, yes, come, no, don't come. That's what we're seeing. So I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan of how Biden has handled this so far. And I actually have students who would give him probably a C at best for a lot of the same reasons that I'm describing. So C maybe closer to a D, actually, now that I think about it.
Well, and of course, it's not as if the Biden White House doesn't send mixed signals on a variety of issues, as some staffers are finding out about their about their recreational habits suddenly becoming disqualifying for holding employment in the White House. But Colin, you made an interesting point, and I wanted to kind of continue with another issue that really I think has been something that a lot of people have been focusing on. Uh, Dina Smeltz, who's at the Chicago Council, has just sent out the results from obviously a competitor organization, in this case, the Pew Trust, but essentially saying that the number of people who see climate and environment as national security issues, not as moral issues, not as humanitarian issues, but as national security issues, is going up, has dramatically spiked, probably because a result of the pandemic. Uh, and I just wanted to get a sense from you about how that shift in messaging may or may not play out. There was another commentator who said, we're seeing a real change. Environment is no longer Al Gore lecturing you about why what you're doing is bad. Environment is now either national security, or this is the opportunity of the future, right? So you were talking about pocketbook issues, and you see a real effort to try to connect environment and climate to we can all make money, we can all have good jobs at good wages, in this area. Do you think any of this is going to resonate with middle America? Do you think that you're going to see a shift on this issue? And again, leaving aside the policy question, because as you said, Republicans and Democrats may often will have different policy prescriptions, but at least the framing of the climate, environment, energy issues in those terms. Do you think that will have salience over time?
Well, I am struck how, on the issue of climate change, the Pentagon, which you would think of as being, one of the more hard-nosed institutions in American life, has long since come to the realization that climate change is real, that it poses security challenges for U.S. forces overseas and even U.S. bases inside the United States, that it can cause, or at least exacerbate or contribute to, civil conflict that may pull you in unexpected ways. So you have to take this seriously, right? And I think there's no question, there's an increased awareness in recent years of how big a challenge this really is. As you say, you're going to get dramatic differences in opinion across the ideological spectrum on how big a problem, what exactly to do about it when it comes to policy prescriptions. I think that's only going to continue with the current administration and in Congress. But just the recognition that this is real, that it actually causes challenges, that there is a security element to this, I think is spreading, actually. And it will be interesting to see in the future whether Republicans can rally around a position that's different from Trump's, but also, let's say, different from Biden's. In other words, just explicitly recognize that you have a problem, that climate change is real, that maybe you want an approach that's a little more free market oriented as opposed to what you would see from progressives, maybe less expensive in terms of the big spending bills we're going to see, but a conservative approach to climate change, right? What would that look like? What would a sensible conservative policy approach to climate change look like? That's, I think, a great question. We just haven't seen that over the years, and the main alternative has been on the left, and which has really been running away with it. I mean, I think that argument has been quite persuasive to a lot of people in the Midwest and around the country. I mean, it does have a certain middle class resonance that if climate change is actually happening and if the environment is being damaged to the extent that it seems to be, maybe something should be done about it. Recognize the reality. So actually, on that issue, I mean, corporations have come around in a dramatic way over the last few years. I remember when I was growing up, environmentalists were, sort of in that bucket of politically kind of fringe movements in a way almost. But it seems like over the years, it's become more and more respectable and more taken up by corporate leaders themselves who are on board with dramatic shifts in policy. So the Biden team, I think, has built on that. And oddly enough, now actually a lot of congressional Republicans are not as close to the corporate world, I'm talking about the big multinationals, as are the Democrats.
Yeah, that's interesting. We follow climate here very closely because it seems to resonate also with the younger generation. And I'm wondering if you can speak to differences in what you see in priorities of Gen Z Republicans versus Gen Z Democrats, if you've looked at that issue at all, because I think that is also an issue that's not parsed, but in all of the problems and issues in foreign policy and domestic policy discussions we've had today, that is one area that I don't think people are looking at. Yes, there's a difference between Republicans and Democrats, but what about the younger generation, which is rising as voters, as leaders? There's, the cabinet is younger. I know Biden's not younger, but the cabinet is younger. What is the differences? What are you seeing the differences in this rising generation?
Sure. Yeah, and there are public opinion polls that indicate that there are differences. I think the most striking one to me is that the youngest generation of Americans tend to be more skeptical of military intervention overseas. And that's on both sides of the aisle. So Republicans as well. And I see this among my students in class as well, undergraduate as well as graduate. And if you think about it, it makes sense. What has their life been? It's not like Nick and I growing up in the 80s, seeing Reagan kind of face down the Soviets, right? Which might give you some optimism as to the possibility for the sort of muscular foreign policy. What they've seen, I'm talking about, let's say, students in their 20s, their entire life is frustration in Iraq, frustration in Afghanistan, frustration in Libya. I mean, we can't seem to do anything right when it comes to military intervention. So the youngest generation of Republicans, I'm not saying it's monolithic. I mean, there's a variety, and there are some that are still pretty hawkish, but it is striking that 20-something Republicans and even 30-something seems to me tend to be more skeptical based on their observations. And I think that ties into a broader sense that they ask themselves, why is it a given with the foreign policy elite of the country in both parties that things have to continue to be the same way they've been for 70 to 80 years? I mean, why would we have to have the exact same commitments overseas that we had starting in the 1940s and 50s? There is a kind of almost theological element to it, right? It's sometimes argued as if we must maintain every single commitment we've made and acquired over that lifetime, the equivalent of a full human lifetime. And I think the youngest generation in particular says, why? I mean, conditions have changed. Wouldn't it make sense to respond and adapt? I mean, the Cold War ended 30 years ago, right? So that's something I hear, and I think that has crept in more and more, right, left, and center.
Yeah, I think that point, Colin, you just raised about the Cold War ending 30 years. It's going to be 30 years this year that the Soviet Union dissolves in December, right? We'll celebrate 30 years, and that the idea that that you are now, Tatiana, as you mentioned, for Gen Z by definition, by generational definition, was born after the end of the Cold War. So it's not even a question of, well, I don't really remember it. It didn't exist. They didn't exist when the Cold War was happening, and so this is no longer the touchstone, right? That that you define what America does in the world in the light of the end of the Cold War, which is definitely right. And I think, Colin, as you said, it's definitely part. And Peter Beinart raised this a couple of weeks ago. That this is the core of the Gen X, to the extent that we can see a Gen X position in foreign affairs. The Gen X generation in policymaking. It is the end of the Cold War, and you take the 1990s as kind of the definitive period. America is astride the world. There are no near peer competitors. All roads run through the United States. Everything is going to work out. And as you said, the younger generations are dealing with 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, financial crisis, a sluggish recovery from that economic crisis, and then the pandemic. And that comes back to, I think, something else you talked again about, and this idea of Donald Trump raising questions, Donald Trump as disruptor. Trump broke decisively with Republican orthodoxy about Iraq and Afghanistan in the campaign, made a big point about wanting to try to wind down these involvements with mixed success. Um, the Biden team essentially is coping with whether or not it should continue in Afghanistan, should continue that drawdown. What is your sense about, in some ways, what was the doorstep issue of the 2016 campaign, which was the forever wars? That America seems to be involved in these conflicts that never seem to be resolved and are always lurking. Is Joe Biden going to be able to finish what Donald Trump ostensibly started to do, which is, that we won't be talking about America's involvement in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, come 2024?
Yeah, no, exactly. Look, I think, and Biden right now is going through this exact same dilemma that Trump and Obama did, which is you come in and you don't want to be the one who's lost Afghanistan, right? So you have
Yeah.
this searching debate over what do we do now? And I get the argument for we can't just walk away. I mean, it's clear that there would be a human rights disaster and the Taliban would want to take advantage of it. I mean, we have to be clear about who they are. But at the same time, I mean, it's been 20 years. I mean, the US has been at war in Afghanistan for 20 years. And a number of the major it is at best a stalemate. And a number of the major objectives clearly have not been achieved and probably aren't going to be achieved. I mean, it's not going to be turned into the type of political system that we would like to see. So, at what point do you say, look, we've taught the Taliban a lesson. Don't ever consider providing refuge for terrorist attacks on the United States itself. Having learned that lesson, now maybe we can wind this down. I mean, so Trump, oddly enough, was actually for ripping the bandage off and negotiating with the Taliban. An extremely unpopular view with Republican foreign policy leaders prior to Donald Trump. So here we are again in a situation where you have these debates inside each party. I think you're seeing it play out on the Democratic side as well, right? The national security establishment tends to want to walk it slowly, be careful. Progressives, I think, are ready to be gone from Afghanistan the day before yesterday. I mean, why are we there, right? There's no disagreement with Trump on that. So this is another area where these divisions cut across party lines. I myself have come to look at Afghanistan a little differently over the last few years. And just to go back to your point about the end of the Cold War, over the past 30 years, the big picture geopolitical change has been the rise of China, right? I mean, this is obvious, blindingly obvious now. It was not obvious in 1991, but it's obvious now that we live in a world where you could even say there are two superpowers and that China is one of them. This is such a massive gravitational force, the economic weight that it throws around worldwide on every inhabited continent, Europe, Africa, South America, Australia, North America. I mean, China's influence is in a completely different league from what it was 30 years ago. And it is an authoritarian challenge to the United States and its allies. The idea that we're not going to really focus on that as the number one challenge, even now, I find baffling. And if we do need to focus on it, which I think we should, you're going to have to make some tough choices on other topics. Afghanistan might be one of those areas, right? So, I mean, there is a point where you must face reality, which is that multiple presidents have tried to say, let's shift to the Asia Pacific. Let's try to draw down in Afghanistan. It's been very uneven, but it seems to be a bipartisan trend. Obama, pivot to Asia. Donald Trump, Joe Biden. I mean, that is probably not a coincidence. There are some very powerful structural arguments in favor of winding down, counterinsurgent efforts in the greater Middle East and shifting the focus to China.
It's going to be so interesting to see what happens in the next 30 days to get to 100 days and to see what Biden says this afternoon in a couple of hours. Thank you so much for your time today, Colin. It was a great conversation. I hope you join us again to keep grading the administration and how they're doing.
Yeah, I was pretty tough on them on the immigration issue, but I might give them somewhat higher grades than others. Thank you. It was great. Great to see
Thank you. No, this was a great conversation. We appreciate you coming on, and thank everyone who are listeners and viewers who have been contributing feedback to us as we continue this dialogue of why what happens in the world matters to you on your doorstep.
Thanks for listening to The Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. For more, go to carnegiecouncil.org. Stay healthy and safe.